The galaxy was restless. The stars burned with secrets of war and peace. Among the stars lived the Volari, an alien race known for their pride and cruelty. They believed themselves to be stronger, faster, and wiser than all others. And above them all stood Princess Liara, cold, beautiful, and untouchable. But peace was fragile. The Galactic Council had decided that only one thing could keep the Volari from starting another war: an alliance sealed with a marriage. And so, the impossible was ordered. Liara, Princess of the Volari, was forced to marry a human, a soldier named Ethan. Liara's heart filled with fire. To her, humans were weak creatures, fragile bodies, short lives, soft hearts. Her people often laughed at them, calling them children playing in a universe far too big for them. To be tied to one was not just shame, it was punishment. But the council gave her no choice. For her people, for her throne, she had to agree. The day of the wedding arrived. On the grand floating citadel of the council, thousands of eyes watched. Volari warriors stood in silence, tall and armored, their faces proud. Human ambassadors sat uneasy, their gazes fixed on the stage. And there, under the silver lights, stood Ethan, waiting. He was not what Liara expected. She thought he would tremble before her, look small beside her towering figure. Instead, he stood tall, his shoulders straight, his eyes calm. He did not wear fear on his face, but neither did he wear arrogance. He simply waited, as if ready to accept whatever storm came his way. Liara walked forward, her long silver gown trailing like starlight. Every step was heavy, as if chains pulled her down. She wanted to scream, to tell the council she would rather face war than stand beside this human. But the cold eyes of her people reminded her, if she refused, the Volari would suffer. So she kept walking, her face like stone. The ceremony was swift. Oaths were spoken in the ancient tongue. Hands were bound by silver threads. And with each word, Liara's heart sank deeper. When the final vow echoed across the hall, silence fell. Princess Liara of the Volari was now bound to a human. The hall erupted in applause, but Liara heard it as mockery. Her people clapped because their princess had been humbled. The humans clapped because they thought they had one piece. But in her chest burned only anger. She looked at Ethan, her new husband, and her eyes were sharp as blades. Yet Ethan did not flinch. He met her gaze with quiet strength. There was no smile, no victory in his expression. Only a calmness that unsettled her more than arrogance would have. For arrogance, she could crush, but calmness was harder to break. When the ceremony ended, they were led to their new quarters, a grand chamber designed to blend human simplicity with Volari luxury. Golden lights hung in the air, walls carved with alien runes. But to Liara, it felt like a prison. Her cage was made of beauty, but it was still a cage. As soon as the doors closed, she turned to him. "You may think this is your victory, human," she hissed, her voice like thunder. "But know this, you will never have my heart, and you will never command me." Her words cut sharp, but Ethan did not answer quickly. He simply studied her, then spoke with steady tone. "I never asked for your heart, princess, and I do not wish to command you." His answer surprised her. She expected him to try and please her, or to show fear. Instead, he gave her indifference, almost as if the marriage was just as much a burden to him as it was to her. That thought unsettled her. Was this human not supposed to be weak, desperate for her approval, desperate to claim her? Liara looked away, her chest tight with emotions she did not want to name. Ethan turned from her and sat quietly by the window. The stars reflected in his eyes as he whispered something she barely heard. I did not want this either. For the first time, Liara felt a flicker of confusion. She thought she was the only one who hated this bond. But now, standing in silence, she realized they were both prisoners, bound not by love, but by duty. The galaxy thought their marriage would bring peace. But inside this chamber, there was only fire and ice. As night fell, the citadel drifted among the stars. The council celebrated their triumph. But behind the closed doors of the royal chamber, two strangers sat in silence, neither trusting the other, neither willing to break first. The beginning of their bond was not love, but war. And yet, somewhere deep in the shadows of destiny, something had begun to stir. The days after the forced marriage were heavy with silence. Princess Liara avoided Ethan as much as she could. She moved like a shadow through their shared chambers, her gaze sharp, her words few. She refused to eat with him, refused to speak more than a command. To her, he was a burden tied to her name, nothing more. Ethan, however, did not fight her coldness. He gave her space, speaking only when needed. He respected her silence, though it pressed on him like the weight of 1,000 stars. He did not try to force himself into her world. Instead, he carried himself with quiet dignity, a soldier obeying orders he did not choose. Yet the silence between them was not empty. It was filled with unspoken thoughts, with glances that lingered longer than they should. Sometimes, when Liara turned her head quickly, she caught him watching her, not with desire, not with arrogance, but with a strange kind of respect. It unsettled her, for she was used to men kneeling before her, fearing her power. But this human, he simply existed beside her, calm and steady. One evening, Liara returned from the council chamber, her mood black as night. Her own people had mocked her behind veiled words. They whispered that their proud princess was now chained to a weakling human. She entered the room, her heart burning, her fists clenched, and there was Ethan quietly repairing a small object at the table. Liara frowned. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice cold. Ethan looked up, then held out the item in his hands. It was a delicate silver flower, broken and bent, a Valari trinket, one Liara had carried since childhood but had shattered during the ceremony. He had found it lying among her things and, without asking, had tried to mend it. "I thought it mattered to you," he said simply. Liara froze, the fire in her chest dimming for a moment. No one else had noticed the flower, not even her closest guards. And yet, this human had picked it up, held it gently, and cared enough to fix it. She wanted to snap at him, to say he had no right. But the words stuck in her throat. For the first time, she saw not a weakling, but hands that carried quiet strength. She snatched the flower from him, her pride still heavy. "Do not touch what is mine," she whispered sharply. But even as she spoke, a strange warmth spread through her chest. That night, as she lay in her bed, she turned the flower in her hand again and again. And though she told herself it meant nothing, she could not sleep. The silence between them began to change. It was no longer cold, but heavy with tension. When they crossed paths, Liara found herself noticing the little things. The way Ethan bowed his head slightly when she entered the room. The way he always stood between her and the door, as if guarding her even when there was no threat. The way he never complained, even though he, too, had been forced into this bond. One morning, Liara woke to find him training in the courtyard. His movements were sharp, his strikes filled with precision. He fought with no audience, no pride, only discipline. And though his strength was not like a Valari warrior's, it was steady, controlled. She watched from the shadows, her heart beating strangely fast. She told herself she was only curious, nothing more. Yet she did not look away. Days passed. Liara began to test him, speaking small words to see how he would react. Sometimes she asked simple questions about humans, about their cities and their lives. Ethan answered with honesty, never exaggerating, never boasting. His stories were plain, but carried warmth. He spoke of sunsets over blue oceans, of music sung by voices instead of machines, of laughter shared between families around wooden tables. It was so different from the cold halls of the Valari, so human, so fragile, and yet so alive. Liara found herself listening more than she intended. Her sharp replies softened, her eyes lingered on him longer. She still carried pride, but deep within, a crack had formed in the wall she had built, and through that crack, something dangerous slipped in, curiosity, but the galaxy was never still. One night, a shadow slipped through the citadel. Assassins, cloaked in dark, crept toward her chambers. Their orders were clear: kill the princess before she could bear the shame of a human bond. Liara had no warning until the door burst open. But before she could react, Ethan was already there, sword in hand. He fought like fire, his body moving with desperate strength. He took the blade meant for her, his blood staining the golden floor. Liara's breath caught. Her heart thundered. For the first time, she saw not a weak human, but a man who would give his life for her. The silence between them shattered, replaced by something far more dangerous. Liara knelt beside him as he bled, her hands trembling. She could not explain why her chest ached, why her voice broke as she whispered his name. But she knew, in that moment, the bond that had begun in silence was no longer fragile. It was burning quietly, dangerously, ready to change them both forever. The chamber smelled of blood and steel. Liara knelt on the cold floor, her silver gown stained crimson where Ethan had fallen. The assassins lay defeated, their bodies sprawled in silence, but victory did not matter. All she saw was the human, her unwanted husband, bleeding because he had chosen to protect her. "Stay still," she ordered, her voice sharp but trembling. Ethan tried to sit up, his jaw set with stubborn strength. "It's just a cut," he whispered, though his hand pressed tightly against his side. Liara's anger burned hotter than fire. "Foolish human," she hissed. "Why would you throw yourself in front of the blade for me?" His eyes met hers, calm even in pain. "Because it is my duty, and because no one should strike you while I still breathe." Her chest tightened. She wanted to shout at him, to call him weak, to remind him she did not need his protection. But the words died before leaving her lips. For the first time in her life, someone had bled for her without expectation. Not for glory, not for power, not for fear of her wrath. Simply because he believed it was right. Liara called the healers of her people. They entered swiftly, their glowing hands working to seal Ethan's wound. Yet their faces twisted with disgust. "Why waste our gifts on a human?" one muttered, not knowing Liara's sharp ears caught it. Her voice lashed like a whip. "You will heal him," she commanded, her tone cold as ice. The healers obeyed, but bitterness hung in the air. And in that moment, Liara realized the danger Ethan faced, not only from assassins in the dark, but from the very halls meant to keep him safe. When the healers left, Ethan slept, his breathing slow but steady. Liara sat by his side, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She told herself she stayed only to ensure he survived, nothing more. But when his face tensed in pain, her own heart ached. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, her touch hesitant, and whispered words she did not understand herself. "You are not as weak as I believed." The following days were tense. Rumors spread quickly through the citadel. Some said humans had staged the attack to gain sympathy. Others whispered that Liara herself had orchestrated it to rid herself of her unwanted husband. Every corner of the council was filled with suspicion. And through it all, Ethan walked slowly, his wound healing, his presence calm. He bore the stares of hatred without complaint. But Liara noticed, she always noticed, the way his jaw tightened when they called him pet, the way his hands curled when they mocked his race. One evening, she found him standing alone on the balcony. The stars stretched endless above them. "You are angry," she said, her voice quiet. Ethan did not look at her, his gaze fixed on the void. "I'm used to it," he replied. "Humans have always been underestimated. We are seen as fragile, short-lived, unworthy of respect." He turned then, his eyes steady. "But I will not break, princess, not for them, not for you, not for anyone." His words struck something deep inside her. For all her life, Liara had believed strength meant domination. That respect was earned through fear. Yet here stood a man who had none of her power, none of her glory. And still, he spoke with the strength of a warrior who refused to bow. That night, a strange thought lingered in her mind. Perhaps the council had not tied her to weakness. Perhaps they had tied her to something else entirely. But fate was not finished testing them. A summons came from the council chambers. They accused Ethan of stirring unrest, of being a danger to the fragile peace. Voices rose demanding he be cast out, stripped of his role. Liara felt fury rise in her chest, hotter than any she had known. For the first time, she stood in public defense of her human husband. He fought for me. He bled for me. He has shown more honor than many in this hall, she declared, her voice echoing. The chamber fell silent, shocked at her defiance. And Ethan, standing behind her, looked at her with eyes filled not with pride, but with quiet gratitude. But Liara knew the truth. The war between her heart and her pride had only just begun. For though she still told herself she did not care for him, the bond between them was no longer silent. It had become a storm, and storms could not be ignored. The wound Ethan carried healed slowly, but it left a scar that Liara could not forget. Every time she saw it, a strange heaviness filled her chest, as if her heart remembered the moment more than her mind wanted to admit. She told herself again and again that she cared only because his death would have meant chaos for the council. Not because of him, but the lies grew weaker each day. Ethan, though wounded, did not complain. He trained when the healers allowed him, his movements slower than before, but filled with the same discipline. He walked beside Liara during council gatherings, silent but steady, a presence that spoke without words. And slowly, the silence between them changed. It was no longer cold, no longer sharp. It became heavy with something else, an unspoken tension, fragile yet unbreakable. Liara began to speak to him more. At first, her words were simple questions about Earth, about humans, about their short lives. Ethan answered plainly, never trying to impress her, never exaggerating. He spoke of oceans that stretched to the horizon, of forests where the wind sang through leaves, of families gathering around firelight, laughing, singing, even fighting, but always together. Liara listened, though she tried not to show interest. His words painted colors she had never seen, sounds she had never heard. For the Valari lived in power and silence, but humans seemed to live in noise and heart. One night, as the citadel drifted across the stars, Ethan told her of sunsets. He said the sky turned gold, red, and violet, as if the heavens themselves were burning in beauty. Liara closed her eyes, imagining it. For all her life, the Valari sky had been black and silver, sharp like blades, never soft, never warm. For the first time, she wondered what it might feel like to stand under a human sky. She began to share in return, though not much at first, a memory of her childhood, a secret she had never told another. She confessed she had once wished to escape the palace walls, to run among the lower cities, to see life without crowns and chains. Her people had called her their brightest jewel, but jewels, she whispered, were nothing more than cages of beauty. Ethan did not laugh, did not mock her longing. Instead, he said quietly, "Then maybe we're not so different, princess." Those words lingered in her heart like a spark refusing to fade. Walls she had built over years of pride began to crack. She found herself watching him when he did not see. The way his eyes softened when speaking of home, the way his hands, rough from battle, handled fragile things with care. It confused her, frightened her, for she had been taught all her life that humans were weak, unworthy. And yet, this one stood taller in her mind than warriors clad in armor. But fate was not silent. One evening, Liara discovered whispers hidden deep in the council's chambers. She followed a trail of voices through dark halls, and what she heard froze her blood. Valari leaders were planning, plotting in secret. They would never allow humans to rise as equals. The marriage was a mask, a trick to buy time. When the humans grew comfortable, the Valari would strike, swift and merciless. The war had not ended. It had only changed shape. Liara returned to her chamber, her steps heavy. She looked at Ethan, unaware of the blade hanging over his people. And for the first time in her life, she felt fear not for herself, not for her throne, but for another. If she stayed silent, her people would call her loyal, but Ethan's race would burn. If she spoke, she would betray the Valari, her crown, and her bloodline. The choice was poison on either side. That night, as she lay awake, Ethan's quiet breathing filled the silence. She turned the silver flower in her hands, the one he had mended for her. Its delicate shape caught the light, fragile yet whole, and she realized with a sinking heart that her walls were no longer unbroken. They had fallen, piece by piece, without her noticing, and in their place, something far more dangerous had grown, a bond she could no longer deny. The storm inside her had begun, and soon it would break across the galaxy. The days after the council trial were heavy with whispers. Every corridor Liara walked carried the weight of eyes. Valari nobles sneered behind her back, and human envoys grew uneasy under the stares of her people. The fragile peace balanced on the edge of a blade, and she knew one wrong step would shatter it. Ethan remained steady, his quiet presence a shield against the storm. But Liara's heart was restless, torn between loyalty to her race and the strange pull she now felt toward the human who stood beside her. She told herself it was duty, nothing more. Yet she could not forget the way he had bled for her, nor the way his words had carried strength when all others tried to break him. One evening, her younger sister Serena came to her chambers. The girl's golden eyes burned with warning. "You are changing," Serena whispered, her voice sharp with fear. "The others see it too. Liara, they believe you are becoming soft because of him." Liara's jaw tightened. "I am still Valari. I will always be Valari." But Serena shook her head. "If you choose him over us, you will lose everything. Your crown, your people, your honor." Those words cut deep. All her life, Liara had carried the weight of her people's pride. To betray, that was to betray herself. And yet, when she closed her eyes, all she saw was Ethan's calm face, the steady fire in his gaze. She hated the choice before her, hated that her heart wavered where once it had been iron. That night, the council revealed their secret. Liara was summoned to a private chamber, where shadows cloaked the walls. There, the leaders of her people spoke in hushed voices. "The humans are growing bold." One said, "They think this marriage gives them power. They must be reminded of their place." Another hissed, "We will strike first, quietly, decisively." Liara's blood ran cold. A new war was coming, and she was expected to play her part. They wanted her to use Ethan, to feed them his trust, his secrets, his weaknesses, so that when the moment came, the Valari could crush the humans before they even realized the war had begun. Her heart thundered. This was her family, her race, her duty, but the thought of handing Ethan over to their cruelty twisted her stomach with sickness. She returned to her chamber in silence, her mind a battlefield, and there she found Ethan waiting, his hand resting lightly on the repaired silver flower he had once given back to her. "You look troubled," he said softly. She wanted to lie, to tell him nothing was wrong, but the words that came out surprised her. "The council plots against your people," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They will not honor this peace." Ethan studied her, his eyes unreadable. "Then why tell me this?" he asked. "If your loyalty belongs to them, you should stay silent." Liara's chest burned, "Because I cannot watch them destroy what little hope we have." Her voice cracked, "And I cannot watch them destroy you." Silence filled the room, heavy and dangerous. Then Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady as a blade. "I will stand by you, Liara, even if the galaxy turns against us." His words struck her harder than any blow, for in them she felt not just loyalty, but something deeper, something she dared not name. But before she could answer, Serena's warning echoed in her mind. "If you choose him, you will lose everything." Her heart pulled in two directions. On one side stood her people, her crown, her honor. On the other stood a human who should have meant nothing, and yet somehow had become everything. That night, Liara sat alone, the silver flower in her hand. Its delicate petals reflected the stars outside her window, fragile yet unbroken, just like the bond she shared with Ethan. She knew betrayal was inevitable, either of her people or of the man she had sworn she would never love. And whichever path she chose, the galaxy would never be the same again. The council chamber was no longer a place of peace. Whispers of war echoed in every shadow, sharp as blades. Liara felt the walls of loyalty closing in on her, pulling her in two directions. On one side stood her blood, her people, her throne. On the other stood Ethan, the human she had once despised, but now could not imagine losing. The first strike came sooner than she feared. Volari warships moved silently across the stars, their weapons hidden, their intent clear. The humans were meant to be caught unaware, crushed before they could defend themselves. But Ethan knew, because Liara had chosen to tell him, and that choice alone made her a traitor to her race. When the alarms sounded through the citadel, chaos erupted. Volari warriors marched in silver ranks. Humans scrambled to gather their defenses. Liara stood in the middle of the storm, her heart torn apart. She heard her people's voices calling her to lead them. She heard Ethan's voice calling her to stand with him. And for the first time, she realized no matter what she chose, she would lose a part of herself. The first battle was brutal. Blinding lights cut through space. Fire rained upon the citadel's shields. Ethan fought with his soldiers, his blade flashing, his movements sharp even as blood stained his arm. Liara watched, her pride burning. This was no weak human, no fragile creature. This was a warrior who stood against an empire. And, without thinking, she joined him. Her hands glowed with Volari power. Her voice called storms of energy. She shattered enemy lines, striking down those who dared touch him. Her people gasped, for their princess was not fighting for them, but against them. Yet Liara did not care, for in that moment, she was not their jewel, not their crown. She was only a woman who refused to let the man beside her fall. The council declared them both traitors. Their voices thundered across the galaxy. Liara of Volari has betrayed her blood. Ethan of Earth has poisoned her heart. They are enemies of peace, enemies of the stars. But Liara stood tall, her voice stronger than their lies. You call him weak, yet he stands while you hide behind chains. You call him unworthy, yet he bled for me when no Volari would. If that is betrayal, then I will wear it proudly. Her words shook the chamber like thunder. And though many spat her name in anger, others listened. Some humans saw hope, some Volari felt doubt. But war cared little for hearts. The fighting spread, world to world, ship to ship. And through it all, Ethan and Liara fought side by side. Nights were filled with silence between battles. They sat together, their armor broken, their bodies bruised. Once enemies, now bound not by duty, not by treaty, but by something far more dangerous. Their hearts had chosen each other, even if the galaxy had not. One night, as stars burned outside their ship, Ethan turned to her. If you regret this, tell me now, he said, his voice steady though his hands trembled. Liara met his eyes, fierce and unyielding. I regret nothing, she whispered. I regret only that I did not see sooner what you are. He leaned closer, their foreheads touching. And in that moment, two worlds collided, not in war but in love. But war was far from over. The council prepared their greatest weapon, a fleet so vast it could blot out suns. Liara and Ethan knew the next battle would decide everything. Their lives, their bond, and the fate of two races that had never believed they could stand as one. The storm had come, and in the heart of that storm stood two souls, once strangers, now bound beyond blood, beyond duty. Their enemies thought this war was of weapons and ships. But Liara and Ethan knew the truth. It was a battle of hearts, and hearts, once awakened, could not be silenced. The final battle came with the weight of eternity. Across the galaxy, Valari fleets gathered like a storm of silver blades, their ships cutting through the dark. Human vessels rose to meet them, smaller but fierce, their engines burning with defiance. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the clash that would decide everything. Liara stood on the command deck of their ship, her eyes cold yet burning with fire. Beside her stood Ethan, his armor scarred, his sword gripped tightly. They were no longer strangers bound by chains, no longer enemies forced into unity. They were partners, their bond forged in blood, silence, and choice. The council's voice echoed across the communication channels. Princess Liara, surrender now and we will spare you. Deliver the human, and your crown remains yours. The offer cut through her like poison. For once, such words might have tempted her. But now, her heart knew no chains. She answered with a voice that thundered across the stars. I will never surrender him. I will never surrender us. If that means I lose my crown, then let the galaxy know. I choose him. The fleets collided. Blazing fire erupted across the void. Ships shattered. Warriors screamed. Ethan led the human forces with courage, his strategies sharp, his movements fearless. Liara unleashed the power of her bloodline, her energy tearing through Valari lines. Together, they were unstoppable, blade and storm, heart and fire. Where one faltered, the other rose. Where one bled, the other shielded. But the Council's fury was not so easily broken. They unleashed their greatest weapon, a massive warship, the Varian, a vessel built to crush entire planets. Its cannons lit the stars like suns, threatening to end everything in one strike. Fear spread through the human fleet. Even Valari rebels trembled. Yet Liara and Ethan did not yield. This is the end, Ethan said, his voice low but steady. Then let it be our end together, Liara whispered, her hand finding his. They launched forward, leading a final assault. Human ships followed their captain. Valari defectors followed their princess. The galaxy watched as two once-divided races fought side by side for the first time. The battle raged until their ship pierced the heart of the Varian. Ethan fought through fire and steel, his blade cutting down foes who towered over him. Liara unleashed the storm within her, her energy cracking walls of iron. And at last, together, they reached the control core. With one strike of blade and one surge of power, the great ship shattered. The Varian fell, and with it, the Council's final strength. Silence followed. The fleets scattered, leaders fled, and slowly, voices rose, not in war, but in awe. For the galaxy had seen what no one thought possible. A human and a Valari standing together, not as enemies, not as chains, but as equals. When the dust settled, Liara stood before what remained of the council. Her crown was gone, her throne stripped away. But she did not bow, she did not break. She declared, "The age of chains is over. If peace is to live, it will not be written in blood. It will be written in trust." Some turned away, bitter and proud. But others listened, truly listened. And from that day, a fragile but real peace began to grow. Ethan stood at her side, his hands still bearing scars, his eyes steady as always. "You lost your crown," he said softly. Liara looked at him, her lips curving in the faintest smile. "No, I found something greater," she whispered. "Forced to marry you was meant to be my punishment, but it became my freedom." Their hands entwined, their hearts unshaken. And though the galaxy remained vast, filled with shadows and storms, they knew no chain, no throne, no war could break what had been born between them. For Liara, once a jewel in a cage, had found love beyond stars. And Ethan, once a soldier bound by orders, had found a destiny greater than war. Together, they walked into a future unknown, not as human and Valari, not as princess and soldier, but as two souls who had defied the galaxy in one.